Hello, good morning. As a way of introduction, you know that in the contents we have there's always somebody who performs first to warm everything up. Well, this presentation, I hope I'll be able to complete some of the ideas already set out very brilliantly, I must say, by Dr. Echenique. Talking about the skills, competences in the different areas. Often we have the impression that everything is in the brain does everything, and that's how everything is materialized. So the first idea that I wanted to present is not a very complicated one, but it is important to explain how the human intelligence works. When we're talking about animal adaptation, things are quite simple. There is a series of changes that mean that this body-brain unit adapts to the demands of the environment. But the humans has developed in a different way. A different component has been added, an essential component. The changes that occur aren't just in a body. They are rather instrumental changes. Clothes, for example, or changing. We don't change. It's not like animals that lose their fur or their hair. What we do is change our clothing depending on the season. And these are things that are culturally transmitted. Our problem then isn't one just of adapting to a physical environment, an external environment, but into a cultural environment corresponding to the demands at a specific moment in time. Biologically speaking, this has a problem, although talking about catastrophes, for example, that is a different matter, but in cultural matters, and neither historically nor geographically, and as a result, the answer from the brain to any cultural environment has to satisfy some conditions. And in some way, they have to provide something that can be easy for our brain to adjust to. In practice, this means that talking about intelligence, in practice, we would have to refer to an intellectual profile, which represent specific ways of forms of information. And they represent physical, mechanical aspects, images, musical, social aspects, apart from the major processes of our condition, creativity, logic, and memory. The key idea would be that we can't use a general resource because each one of these forms of representation has its own rules. We can't look for the image or make it integral. We cannot transfer from one area to another the rules of the game. And combined with an organ which is a very costly one. You say that our brain absorbs between 25–35% of the blood flow, and there's a lot of body of blood rather in the body. And in practice, we estimate that in energy consumption, there's 1 kilo of brain and 22 kilos of muscle, with which the classical things say that our brain grows and we work better and better. Well, maybe that is the case, but other things will have to grow too for the brain to work properly, to the heart, your neck. And something that occurs is the blood irrigation in different parts of the brain isn't the same. There are parts that are well irrigated and work more efficiently, and others that work a little bit worse. Even the distribution as well changes. There are different components of the brain architecture that determine that a normal profile is made up of different points, some that can work more efficiently. In this specific example, verbal, and others work less efficiently, or on a representative level, it is quite poor. It can be quite poor. In functional and brain terms of the use of these resources, what we would find firstly are concepts such as simple talent and strictly intellectual level, and profiles such as these, where a certain representational resource represents a high level. Here we can talk about simple talent, verbal. The person can be very effective without any problem. But we can see that other resources have lower levels. A more complicated manner is the academic, where it combines resources such as memory, logic, verbal, once again, where the complexity emerges if this person can be competent in these three aspects, and the resources that this person has enables them to organize matters better. To do for exams, for example, they're very good, or for pre-organized things as well, they work very well, but to innovate the level isn't as high. This person, for example, could have very good marks at any education stage, any type of discipline, engineering, for example. But on the other hand, in practice, a profile such as this, and I'm sorry about the difference in formats, there were different moments in time of the data collection, and so there are different ways of representing it. A profile such as this, we can see strong points, physical, mechanical, image, numbering, logic, memory. Probably during the development, maybe the marks that they got weren't so good. They wouldn't be very good at verbal aspects, but as a researcher, a developer, the profile of this person could be very good, especially with respect to engineering. The previous profile corresponds to the combination of IQ, a high IQ. The great masters of chess have a high IQ, that is true. But even the ones that don't play well may have a high IQ. Does that determine everything? No. Well, in fact, we're talking about 3 out of 11. And this is one of the key aspects. Here we have the maximum exponent, rather. Maybe they said that they had the harmonious. And what does this profile show us? Well, it is something that is very clear and essential. They can manage any type of representational complexity. This profile could face up to any type of object, whatever the nature, whatever the type of elements involved. I'm going to go back here. Here we have the simple talents, verbal. In these cases, we'll say, well, this sort of person will dedicate their time to literature. Yes, because with language, they're going to be very good. But if they're having to represent different people, it is an interpersonal, social aspects. They're going to have problems. In terms of inventing new situations, creativity isn't one of the strong points. And probably in this sense, this person may represent the language very well, but in literature, for example, they wouldn't produce great literary works. And this person would even do it worse. It's not. But this person, yes, would have no complication in producing good literature or architecture or generating good science either. So the basic idea and the underlying aspects here is that the brain defines the representational profile. Environment where this person develops, resources are used, functions built. And then we have the mind, which are the mental processes, which is how we use our brain. If you think, for example, about your grandmothers or great-grandmothers, women in this case who lived at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century, and what were their brains like? Well, like anybody else's. Some very good, some of them more intermediate. Did they use them? Did they use their brains? Well, I'm afraid they probably didn't. And that is the difference between if the resources are in their physical basis or are used as functions. And that is the difference between having a Ferrari in your garage, yes, a fantastic car, and if they just leave it there for people to have a look at, oh, what a beautiful car, do you want to get in it? But they don't, never use it. Probably our roads aren't even the right roads to be able to use that car. So we have to have the right conditions for it to perform correctly. So the functions built can acquire knowledge. The knowledge, in fact, or learning, in fact, is in the center. The educational process does not believe that knowledge is the result of the educational action, but education exists. Learning education can exist rather without education, but it isn't learning. And the resulting knowledge is an individual process. Each individual uses the resources available to represent parts of the objects around them. And what is more important here, we don't reason on nothing, we reason on these structures. You will have probably observed that people who appear on the television, in chats for shows, for example, and may have a brilliant presentation, but a couple of days later say stupid things. And as they talk about all different topics, it doesn't mean that that person always reasons at the same level. For example, you've probably heard a person say, well, look, I only know that. Often they are right, because they only know that. And only knowing that, the consequences are the ones that exist. If they knew the information that was missing, they would go in a different way. So good knowledge structures are going to be the basis for higher levels of creativity, etc. This situation is illustrated in expert people. For example, the global route. Everybody starts as a novice. And the interesting part here of the works carried out by experts in the 80s and 90s, in fact, there are two paths. One leads to becoming an expert, as in this case, although there aren't many cases that reach this level. Another path, there are some who always remain as novices, but there are others, which is more frequent, are people who become experienced. The main difference is that in experts, they always use their resources, their experience, their thoughts, and they prepare the structures in depth with the information that they can represent, and they use them to reason. People, experienced people, often work with different matters. They use lists, and the productivity is lower. Therefore, in general, the high performance of experts isn't so much the result of an instruction. It is often the result of things that come from inside, they're individually. What this chart shows us is a project, I'm not sure if it was from Florida or Texas, but 5 specialists in the breathing apparatus got together to create a protocol for the entire state. They got to work for a few months, and the resulting protocol, is the dotted line here, was less efficient than any of the protocols that they used in each of these experts used in their hospitals. They didn't want there to be competition between them, maybe. No, that wasn't the case. But what experts usually do is work individually, and reaching an agreement means sacrificing something that I think is good, the other person sacrificing something else. In the end, the level is good. It can be efficient, but it won't be as good as what each of them could do individually. But this does not occur with experienced people. This only appears with experts. Concluding and abiding by the time assigned to me, on this diagram, on the left-hand side, we can see the overlapping of the brain cognitive functions which support knowledge, and these functions and the knowledge enable us to think, to reason about the object that is represented, having cognitive knowledge. But on the right-hand side, we have another couple of elements that we must also bear in mind. Commitment, for example. Work. You remember that the president has mentioned 90% of transpiration and 10% of inspiration. It was Edison's sentence. It's 1% of inspiration and 99% of transpiration. That 1% is essential. This is the idea of what comes from the left-hand side. Anyway, the other parts are necessary too. It is necessary to try, to persist, to resist frustration, etc. There is also another component, and that is luck. Not everything can be controlled, not everything can be foreseen. Luck also plays its part. For example, if I hadn't coincided with that person at a certain moment in time, we wouldn't have had that opportunity. So luck also exists. As a result, all brains, there are only few that have combined all of these components, will be able to reach a level of competence.